Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Chatham, New York, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York City, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, and welcome to Sleep In Sunday, where we get to sleep until 8 o'clock. And it's our special guest day, Q&A day, we call it. No, that's yesterday. It's special guest day today. And today we have a very, very special guest. He, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. And Brahmatirtha, I've always wanted to meet, never met him, but just met him this morning. But we have so many mutual friends, but I've always looked up to him. You know, he was always highly spoken about by people I really respect. So I always wanted to meet him. And he did this very Q&A book that was published with that Prabhupada's, and he asked questions about, it was called Perfect Questions for Perfect Answers. So some of you may have read that. It's a small, very easy access to the teachings of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And that I fell in love with this book, and I always wanted to meet him ever since then. Kaustubha, you want to give more of an introduction?
Sure. Bob Cohen, or Brahmatirtha Das, was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1949. I think it was a nicer town back then. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did time in Newark.
It's making some comeback now.
That's what I hear. And that was in 1949. You completed your BS. You stopped BSing?
Never stop BSing.
Okay. You completed your BS in chemistry at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in 1971 and received your MS in geology from Rutgers in 1975. After a 20-year career serving as a geologist and vice president of a large regional environmental company, he currently works as an environmental consultant to state governments. He has been a member of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, the science wing of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, since the inception in 1976, giving a presentation at the first International Conference on Life Comes from Life in 1977, and now serves as the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. Brahmatirtha is a certified mediator and a certified ombudsman, and serves as the co-director of ISKCON Resolve. He lives with his wife in Gainesville, Florida. Prabhu, you do so much. You're so multifaceted. Usually I come to these interviews with like all these questions prepared, but there's just so many facets to your service that I almost don't know where to start.
One of my favorite services is dear to you, serving with you on the board of the Bhakti Center.
How could I miss that?
And that's one of my favorites. That's you and I get to work together on really trying to give a sense of service to the people of New York, help everyone elevate their consciousness through the ancient techniques presented in a modern way.
And, you know, we're also grateful for the service that you do. You always joke like you don't do anything, but really like, one of the reasons we want to have you here is because you kind of like, I see you as serving this role, kind of like as maybe even nowadays people don't even want to be like categorized, but like as an elder, you know, like a person, like a wise person that is experienced and knowledgeable and level-headed and kind-hearted, and you just help everyone. And so I just, this gives me a chance to you know, publicly thank you for that service.
Thank you very much. I appreciate when your master and my dear mentor, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, passed on almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The shock was that the Krishna Society had finally had elders, because when I joined, everyone was under 30. Finally had elders, and then we lost our elder.
Yeah.
So, there's a local, there was a very famous Reconstructionist rabbi who's passed on, but he started teaching a course, and I thought it was quite brilliant. It was about aging, and he called it saging.
Oh.
And he was a founder of the Reconstructionist movement. It's a kind of a vegetarian version of Judaism with other aspects, and kind of a combination of orthodoxy and modernity. And he started, as he got older, he said, well, now it's time to get into saging, to take all that we've learned and actually use it. Sometimes the question's asked, well, would you want to be young again? Of course, you know, we want to have all the vitality, but I wouldn't want to be in that body and without knowing what I know now.
Right, right. I like the saging. I think that's something that you could steal there, Raghunath. What do you think?
I'll take it. I was excited and then intimidated. Kaustubha Prabhu read me your bio before the show, and I was like, oh. He's like, so what do you want to ask Brahmatirtha? I was like, what's it like being a smart devotee? Is it more fun than being a dumb devotee?
Being an adult, what is that like?
Oh, God. But I appreciate all your contributions. When I do get very intimidated when I see devotees who are very educated and very together and very connected, and they've, yes, that's intimidating.
Okay, so maybe we could start here, though, Prabhu. Let's start with the book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, and you were in the Peace Corps. This was in what year? Oh, there it is. What year was that?
I went to India in 71.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And joining the Peace Corps, your idea was to try to serve the people in India in some way?
Oh.
What was it?
That's the PR's publicity stance.
Okay.
The thing that a 21-year-old American can go overseas to another country and save them is hubris at its worst.
Okay.
And it just made no sense. And I understood that very quickly. What it is, it's a cross-cultural exchange. That made sense to me.
Right.
And in those days, getting in the Peace Corps was difficult. It was no longer an alternative to the draft, but it was popular with all the craziness going on of the protests of the 60s and Vietnam War and strikes. It was much more active than, let's say, Black Lives Matter protests that we have nowadays. It was 100 times more active. Okay. And with all that, there was something wonderful about getting away. And my last 2 years of school was just a blur. We were on strike so much and protesting, and I would join protests. I had no idea what was being protested sometimes. Protest. So I want to go to India since I was a little boy. I mean, I just had this deep desire to go to India. I don't know where it came from, other than I must have been there before in another life. And so when I applied to the Peace Corps, getting in was difficult. Getting assigned to India was easy. And I requested India, and they gave it to me.
Okay.
India was considered at that time the worst assignment in Peace Corps.
Really? And,
It was more austere than even other third world assignments. And Peace Corps, they had countries like Fiji and Jamaica. I mean, they had some, places that are
nice places to
go to. As far as like material comforts, they were there. But you go to India. The rumor is when you get there, you get Delhi belly your first day, which I confess happened.
Okay. And so, how did you find, so at that time in 1970, was it 71 that you found Prabhupada in Mayapur?
Yeah, I went to Mayapur in February of 72.
Okay.
Well, what's the mission for a Peace Corps? Like, what did you have to do there? Did you want you to farm or build houses or sanitation?
There's all these assignments. I was a high school science teacher. And of all the states in India, I was assigned the most backward state. And of all the districts in the most backward state, I was assigned the most backward district. And fortunately, it was an overnight train ride, the closest place to Calcutta. So I used to, when I wanted to go see a big city for about 25 cents, take an overnight train ride to Calcutta. And there I met the devotees.
Oh, okay. And they mentioned to you this project that's 3 hours or so north of there.
I was visiting Calcutta, and I ran into some devotees. They said, we're doing food relief for the Bangladesh refugees. There was a war between India and Pakistan.
Right.
And this place, Mayapur, a few hours north of Calcutta, is right on the Ganges River and right on the border between Bangladesh and India. So there were tens of thousands of refugees coming from Bangladesh. And because it was it was a nasty war, as wars are. And they said they were doing food relief. So I said, well, that sounds like a nice experience. So I went up to help feed the refugees. I was on break from my teaching assignment.
Okay, so then they brought you to what was then just the seed of what today is a huge project that you also continue to be involved in from your science angle. Where currently there's a city in that, I don't know if city is the right word, but a very large community.
It's a small city now.
Small city, yeah.
I mean, they have sewage treatment plants and now power plants and everything. It's a real city. Then there was a men's tent, a women's tent, and a straw hut for Prabhupada.
Right. So this place. So let me just fill in listeners that may not be familiar. It's called Mayapur. The larger area is called Navadweep. It's the area that is considered a very important holy place for Bhakti yoga practitioners, as the birthplace of Sri Chaitanya, who is recognized in our lineage as an avatar of Krishna, and as to recognize to everyone as a very important figure in the history of the Bhakti movement. Srila Prabhupada at that time was establishing what would grow to be a city there, along with a tremendous temple that is prophesized in literature going back centuries, and that temple is also meant to be a Vedic planetarium, which from your science background you're also involved in today. But without jumping forward to that, I'm interested to understand. So you went in there. Do you consider you were kind of on a spiritual quest as a Peace Corps member, being in India?
Oh, it was 100% a spiritual quest.
Okay.
Yeah, I had read the Bhagavad Gita in college, 2 or 3 different versions of it, and this was in the 60s, and I was fascinated by it.
Okay. And so then you met these Hare Krishna people in Calcutta. They brought you up there to feed the refugees from Bangladesh. And now you're in this little community of Bhakti yoga practitioners with a very elder, saintly guru and kind of brand new young practitioners there. And what was your impressions there? What were your impressions of Prabhupada, and how did that book come about, and what were your impressions of that community in general?
Well, I'll tell you the realization I had for the secret inner story.
Okay. Is this an exclusive?
Well, others, I since this occurred half a century ago, I haven't spoken about it very much, just because it was, I didn't want the experience to be about me, and I always was shy, but people have asked me to speak about it a lot recently. So I said, okay, that's my duty. I didn't consider myself at all very special, but a few things occurred that were very fortunate for me. One, I was young, 22, I think, when I met Prabhupada. And I was educated. And in India then, you had Americans my age were the only, other than one person I met the whole time I was in India, people my age, everyone was kind of in the hippie mood.
Right.
But the Peace Corps made me cut off my hair before I went. That was a requirement. And yeah, I was there as a professional. So though I might have had hippie aspirations, there wasn't much opportunity to practice. So, so I was educated. I was a non-hippie. I was sober, and that was rare.
Right.
Very rare indeed. So when I went there, they had just bought this land. It was a sacred place that had been rediscovered. It's kind of like, rediscovering Jerusalem or something.
Right.
After 500 years, they rediscovered the sacred place, and Prabhupada's some of his men did a miracle and purchased it. It was very hard to do in India, and so Prabhupada announced, we're going to do a festival, and there was nothing there. So 70 mostly Western Hare Krishnas descended for this festival, almost all of them under 25.
Right.
Many under 20.
Okay.
And when people are new to anything, be it a sports team or a religious movement, all of us tend to get very enthusiastic with something new. Like now Apple came out with a new watch. So everyone who gets it is going to be very enthusiastic for that new watch for a couple of days. So similarly, everyone there was very enthusiastic, and there was only one guest at the whole festival, me.
Okay. That's an interesting.
One. Now, some villagers came. There were mostly Muslim villagers in the area. Very nice people. They didn't speak English, and they just came to see these curious white people from America dancing around and all. They were curious, and that was it. And so when I got off the boat, I took a train, then you take a boat across the river to get there. This wonderful devotee, Tejas, met me. Mm-hmm. And he had also been in the Peace Corps before he became a devotee. So immediately we hit it off, and he said, would you like to meet Prabhupada? And of course, I'd known about the devotees and seen the devotees chanting in New York, and was fascinated by the mantra that was in the 60s. So this whole picture fit together, and said, wow, that'd be an opportunity. Now, in the Gita, there's an interesting verse, and it says, it's an instruction that the Gita is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. It's an existential crisis conversation. Mm-hmm. So it's very succinct. They have very short time to get to the essence. And one of the early instructions Krishna gives to Arjuna, he says, look, approach a spiritual master. Inquire submissively. Don't challenge. Render some service. And the spiritual preceptor can actually give you knowledge. So I didn't particularly know that verse of the Gita, but I accidentally hit the formula.
Okay.
I didn't even, I'd read the Gita, but I didn't know that verse or anything. But right. I was rendering service because I was doing food relief for the refugees. I said, I don't know.
Cultured and polite.
Excuse me?
You're cultured and polite, and therefore you asked submissively. You weren't, you came there with, here's an elderly sadhu. I can see how that formula came together perfectly.
Yeah, I didn't challenge. I said, look, I'm not going to challenge him. I mean, he might really know something. And I had met some really weird gurus in my sojourn in India. I'm glad to talk. I won't mention names, but I can certainly say how weird they were. And as soon as I saw Prabhupada and his followers, I knew he wasn't some weird person. Now, I couldn't say, was he really the bona fide teacher of the tradition? But I wasn't going to challenge him. I'll process that later. But I have a chance to ask someone who could be very realized questions. So I approached submissively. I rendered service. I accidentally hit the formula. I mean, what can you do? It's sort of like, everyone who wins a lottery thinks they actually have some brilliance in getting the number. But I mean, it was like I hit the formula. What can I say?
And those inquiries, did you, that became the book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, were you recording it? Was someone else recording it? Had you intended to publish it in any way?
No, not at all. Shyama Sundar was Prabhupada's secretary. Unfortunately, the first conversation I had with Prabhupada was not recorded because Shyama Sundar had very limited cassette tapes with him. Right. And it wasn't that you could go down to the local market and buy it. There were no local markets.
Sure.
And so the book begins not at the beginning. And it begins, and it's a little odd beginning because when I first met Prabhupada, it was a more normal greeting. Well, who are you? What do you do? How are you? So that kind of important getting to know me was left out of the book. Right. Then after the first conversation, Shyama Sundar said, this is interesting. And then he hit the record button. I had no idea it was being recorded. I had no idea.
So he just kind of caught on, hey, this is something that could, that people might want to hear.
And afterwards, Shyama Sundar said to Prabhupada, boy, those are perfect questions. And Prabhupada said, yes, make this a book, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. And that's how it happened.
We had Shyama Sundar on the show a few weeks ago. And here's just another thing that he did. He's amazing with all that, all that he's been involved with.
Of course, he has his great book out now, Chasing the Rhino.
Right.
But I mean, somebody needs to make a movie about him.
Yeah, you could make a movie just about him. Now there's a topic that I wanted to bring up with you. And maybe this could be a segue into it, because you were mentioning you're here in this very foreign place with young people, especially from America, foreign place to them. They've got this brand new budding enthusiasm for their spiritual path. I was also reading another excellent book, Vishaka Devi's book, Your God Says, who was also there at that time.
Sure was.
And yeah, and what I appreciate, we want to bring her on as a guest. And what I appreciate about her book is it doesn't paint any flattering picture. It's just like it's really dealing with her cynicism or skepticism about her whole spiritual experience, but how her heart kind of changes through it. And so when she was writing about that time where you were there, it has a lot to do with her trouble and her dealings with a lot of those young, enthusiastic spiritual practitioners that were there. And maybe I would, I don't want to, I appreciate so many of those people that were there and that were sacrificing so much to serve there. But I also just kind of want to, with you, bring up the idea, because not only were you there and you have such a long history of experience in a spiritual community, as well as a counselor in that spiritual community, that it seems that when people are young to a spiritual path, that it's not uncommon that they approach it with a kind of enthusiasm that could border on fanaticism, or maybe there are certain patterns that young spiritual enthusiasts fall into that aren't maybe the most mature, and that could be harmful. Is that something that you witnessed there? Or let's not even put it there, but let's say in general, are there common patterns of immaturity to people coming to spiritual paths?
And can I also maybe preempt that with, what did you think? I mean, were you all excited or into hype? Were you cynical? Were you hesitant? What was your mood when you met these people? Were you all in 2 feet?
No, I wasn't all into it at all. I was the consummate observer. And I saw the devotees chanting in this around 68 in Greenwich Village. And I liked the mantra so much, I said, I'll make that my own. And I learned the mantra from the Hair album.
Right. Raghunath, hit it.
Okay. Oh, the bees are thankful for the trees. I can't remember exactly.
He loves the musicals. You know, he loves the musicals.
Yeah.
Especially 60s musicals.
Yeah. And so I was the consummate observer, and I was trying to just step out of myself. And then a magical moment happened to me, and I could no longer be the observer.
Sounds like a Krishna miracle coming.
We're calling them Krishna miracles, Prabhu.
Actually, in this case, I'm going to call it Krishna magic.
Okay.
Because the person who coined that phrase was the miracle worker.
Shamsundar?
Yamuna.
Oh, okay, Yamuna.
And I was talking with Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada kept calling me into him. I would be serving, and somebody would come, Prabhupada wants to see you again, 3-4 times a day. This went on for several days. So I would, go to see Prabhupada in his thatched hut, and it was a small hut, and I would sit with him, and I realized years later why Prabhupada was calling me in. There was 70 zealots. He was protecting me. I got that one. And then it was full moon night. It was called the sacred holiday was called the Gaur Purnima. I mean, it was a full moon night. And Yamuna, who has now sadly left us, but the wonderful Yamuna, those who have been to Krishna temple, hear her sing the Govinda prayers every morning. She's the famous author of cookbooks. She was one giant heart, as well as being brilliant. So Yamuna walked up to me, and there were no lights there, a little generator for the stage where activities would occur. But it was a full moon, clear night, and the moon was reflecting in her eyes, and there were tears coming down her eyes. And she walked up to me and started, as we said in those days, love bombing me. Says, "You are so fortunate. You are so fortunate. Prabhupada is giving you all of his time all day. Nobody gets that. You're so fortunate." And it sort of struck my heart. Wow. And then I got very scared, and I went down. I did something uncharacteristic of me. I went behind into the rice paddies that were drying at this time of year, behind the festival tents, and just collapsed and started crying. And because I was scared, I didn't want to join or anything. I just wanted to learn. And so the next morning, Prabhupada calls me in, and I say to Prabhupada, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the attention you're giving me. By the way, I have to leave now. I have to go back to my teaching." And Prabhupada turns to me and goes, "Don't talk L-E-A-V-E, talk L-I-V-E. And so don't talk leave, talk live." And I said, "You want me to stay?" He said, "Yes, you should stay here longer." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "Good boy." The same kind of good boy you would say to your dog when your dog sat and told your dog to sit.
Did he pat you on the head when he said it?
Almost like that.
Yeah.
Prabhupada did later on actually pet me on the head, which I understood was just a follow-up. But, and then everything changed, because I understood the conversation was no longer theoretical about, well, what about yoga and science and philosophy and epistemology? The conversation then shifted in a subtle but dramatic way to what do I need to do to raise my consciousness.
So you shifted from observer to practitioner.
Yes, it did. It did. And it was Prabhupada, when I look back at the conversation or listen to the recordings of it, his brilliance and how he made me feel so comfortable, never made me feel out of place. And I said very embarrassing things in the book. And he never made me feel embarrassed. He just, it's the human experience. We all go through the human experience. And Prabhupada kept coming back to the point, how are you going to raise your consciousness? What do you do? And he ultimately gave me the secret for raising one's consciousness, the ultimate secret. And if you don't mind, maybe I could share that.
Please share the secret.
Yeah. There were 70 Hare Krishnas there, all, like I said, very young and very enthusiastic. So everyone wanted to tell me what I needed to do.
Right.
So by the end of each day, I had big piles of should around me. You know, I was just in a big pile of should. And I didn't want to. You should do
this, you should do that.
Yeah, I didn't want to live in a should world. You should do this. Should. So I asked Prabhupada, this wasn't in the book, but I said, but he actually did say this to me in the book too. So it's in both places. Okay. What do I really do to raise my consciousness? And he gave me the most important secret possible. And that was the one choice that I can make. And the example is like when I get on an airplane, I have very little choices. I can go to Kennedy Airport and I can fly, COVID aside, almost any place I want. But once I get on that plane, my choices are extremely limited. I can lean my seat or I can get a 7-Up or water. But other than that, I have very few choices. And even leaning my seat, you can't always do because the guy in back you starts kicking it. So you have fewer and fewer choices. But I had the choice of which plane to get on. So similarly, the choice Prabhupada gave was I had the choice of who I hang out with. And he said, that's going to affect my consciousness more than anything else. So he said, that's the choice I make. Once I make that choice, who when I hang out with doesn't mean who I'm casually with. It means who I reveal my mind to, who I tell them what my inner thoughts are, who I listen to their inner thoughts, basically who I trust and who trusts me. That's a decision I make. And when I make that decision, that's the most important decision. That was, and that's how I lived my life since then. I try to hang out with people, frankly, like you, Kaustubha, who really, you know, when I speak to you, I can reveal my mind to you, tell you what I'm thinking. You tell me your mind. We go back and forth. We discuss things, and I'm very relaxed in that atmosphere, you know, because I trust you. You have some trust of me, and that's what makes and. That's really one of the inner secrets of spiritual life. When Raghunath Swami began his incredible project in Chowpatty, what he did is he set up a system so people could, everyone could, first, let's not talk about sharing our inner knowledge with everyone else. Let's talk about sharing it with each other and raising our consciousness. Then we could share it with others. But we develop our own inner strength by who we hang out with. And that was what Prabhupada taught me.
That's a beautiful secret. Thank you for that. That's very much in, you know, this past week on our show, we were reading about, you know, Srila Prabhupada quoted a verse from spoken to Maharaj Raghunath by Bhaktivedanta about how bhakti, it doesn't come from any particular austerity or practice or the different kind of things that are there that we'll find in the yoga literature or the Vedas, but it only comes by the blessings of another devotee.
Yeah, that's so.
So then in one sense that, again, I'm going to try to segue into this topic because I feel that you have such realization on this. So that idea that we come to a spiritual path full of enthusiasm, but maybe not with full of experience or wisdom or maturity. Do you see that manifest in certain patterns that maybe we should note and be aware of and think about?
There's, wherever we go, there's a certain fanaticism. For example, America is extremely polarized now.
Yeah.
To get nominated, let's say, to be a Democratic senator, you have to really shift to the far left. And to get nominated to be a Republican senator, you have to shift to the far right. And then to get elected, you sort of have to shift a little to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with nobody quite knowing where they stand, and sincerity gets lost. So we end up with a lot of fanaticism. So I'm using the example of the current American extreme polarity.
Okay.
And in religious society, it's very easy to become self-righteous and lose our humility. And when we lose our humility, then what happens is we think we know better than everyone. And when that happens, we do, and this is, it could be in the Krishna movement, it could be among Jews or Christians or Muslims. It doesn't really make a difference. It's a universal pattern. And the pattern is this: we mix up the details and principles of the service. For example, take the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition. Love thy Lord with all thy heart, with all thy might. Now, that is Bhakti Yoga, presented in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And that's the principle. Now, the details might be what we think in the Christian tradition of the trilogy and the Jewish tradition, let's say, of the details we have to follow. When the details become more important than the principles, then we become fanatics.
That is a very nice summary there. They're very helpful. Can you, well, having said that, could you share me, that's one example. Could you give me an idea of the kind of principles that we might cling to as spiritual practitioners, and as well as the kind of details that often we might get lost in?
Yeah. I'll give examples from, let's say, the Krishna tradition. The principle, the principle is to elevate the consciousness by taking instructions from spiritual mentors. It's the primary principle given by Rupa Goswami, one of our major preceptors. The detail would be what clothes I'm wearing while I'm doing it, or what rituals that may be practiced to help us with that. But the principle that Krishna says in the Gita, he presents Bhakti Yoga. Just think of me all the time. Just surrender to me. Just think of me. Chant my name. That's the highest principle given in the Gita. It's the same principle given in Judeo-Christian traditions. And then the details. For example, there was one tell it from my tradition, which is a Jewish tradition. One Jewish guy was stranded on an island for many, many years. And he built a hut and he built a place of worship and did all these things. And then one day a boat finally saw his smoke and came and rescued him. And he said to the captain, before I leave this, I want to show you, this is the hut I built where I lived. This is the synagogue where I worshiped. And the captain goes, what's that other building? Oh, that's the other synagogue. I would never go there anymore. And why? Because there's probably some detail, little detail they didn't like. I do mediations for the city of Gainesville. And sometimes I end up with these it's for the police department. They got tired of getting called by churches having an argument over that Jesus would never paint the church this color. I'm not kidding.
For real.
That's a detail.
Yeah.
What about what Jesus taught about love? It gets forgotten. So it's very easy when we become a little self-righteous. I've been self-righteous. I know what that's like. When we become self-righteous, to mix up details and principles.
Now, did you have something you want to bring up, Raghu? I see.
Brahmatirtha Prabhu is part of this very, very interesting thing that I was always curious about, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which was a group of devotee scientists. And can you just share, like, why was that formed? And I've heard you were one of the original members. You know, what did you all do with this? What were you supposed to do? Did Prabhupada give you a mission as a scientist?
Here, give me screen sharing permission, if I could.
Okay, but please keep, Mara, could you do that, please? Our executive producer, but please keep in mind that most of our listeners won't be able to see the screen.
Oh, okay. I won't bother. It's a picture from 1977. And it shows that our bodies do really change.
Oh, is that the picture where there's 5 of you standing there?
Yeah,
You got your bead bags out?
Yeah, I won't bother with it. Prabhupada's first book he wrote was an interesting book. It was in praise of science, and it was called Easy Journey to Other Planets. And he wrote it in the late 50s. And Sputnik had just been launched. And there was also some scientists had discovered antimatter.
Okay.
And so Prabhupada had.
So that would have been 1950 something?
58, 50, something like that.
Okay.
And in this book, Prabhupada then took the idea of Sputnik, we want to go to the planets, matter, antimatter, and spiritualize the whole thing. And then gave a theme that if we really want to go to other planets, we have to make our consciousness suitable for that planet.
Right.
And the real antimatter is spiritual life. And and he spoke very appreciative of the scientists. He said there's a pinprick in what the scientists are presenting, because everything they're presenting is based on a material paradigm. But even nowadays, you have the famous philosopher David Chalmers says the hard problem of science is consciousness. What is consciousness? And many scientists are coming to the conclusion that we can't explain it materially. So Prabhupada founded the Bhaktivedanta Institute with the idea of exploring this using the overlap of modern scientific principles with the ancient wisdom we get from the scriptures.
Which speaks so much of consciousness.
Yeah, and consciousness. So the first conference we did was called Life Comes from Life, meaning life doesn't come from matter. Mm-hmm. And so we did a consciousness, a conference a year and a half ago in which we tried to follow up on that thing. We had 450 people show up for the public opening night. Mayer opened it. Some of the most famous scientists on the planet came. And then we had, but the main thing is we had also 50 scientists who are Bhakti Yoga practitioners come, mostly PhDs from 5 continents. And the idea was—
I'm sorry, how many came?
50. From 5 continents.
Okay.
And the idea was, what can we do to further push on this agenda of life comes from life, that consciousness is not a material construct. Mm-hmm. And so I'm the director of the Institute now, somehow, and we are putting out a series of books. Our first one is called Krishna and Quark, is just in the final stages of pre-press, and a series of books will be coming out. We've been working on it for about 5 years now, and this is our publishing year.
Are these books going to be readable by us normal people, or are they?
This will be It's in the intended audience of the books are people with a moderate education, and it's an intellectual.
I guess not.
Yeah, I guess I might
all
qualify.
of you on here would be it. It's not intended for people who have advanced degrees in science at all.
Okay, great.
It's also not intended for people who know nothing. You don't even know the terms.
Right.
So it's written, you might say, at a freshman college level. Kind of standard.
Let me I guess I'll ask a question just from your personal perspective. And maybe this subject of consciousness and how it's being approached in science, to me, it seems like practically everything that, like, I don't know how you would characterize it, but in other words, like humanity's understanding of who we are and what life is all about, it almost rests on this question. If consciousness is not produced materially, that means that there is a whole nother realm of science that apparently we only have access to through spiritual teachings, or at least spiritual ideas. And so if I'm a scientist that's kind of, I have a conviction or a maybe even a desire that not be the truth, it's hard to let go of trying to put forward another theory. But is there a growing understanding that these theories are weak, that present that consciousness is a material construct?
It's huge now. I mean, there are reputable, qualified, well-published scientists all over the world who are questioning this, and we are quite allied with them. We were going to have a summit that we were organizing with a group from Princeton, was scheduled for this October. COVID aside, it will be postponed a year. And the idea that consciousness is just a material construct has problems both scientifically and philosophically. Take qualia, which is, we're all looking at screens now, and on the screen I see it says live on Facebook, which is red. Well, what is that redness? I'm seeing a redness. Now, we can say it is such and such a frequency on the spectrum, but that's not what I'm seeing. I mean, I am seeing a quality. Who is the seer of that quality?
Right.
It's not my eyeball. It's not even my neurons.
Right.
What is it? Who is the observer of these things? And there's a trick, though, and this is the dilemma. In order to really understand consciousness, we need to raise our consciousness. If our consciousness is really in a very low state of spiritual functioning, then it's very hard to understand consciousness. But those who practice meditation, those who do what's necessary, diet, yoga, practices, praying, whatever, to raise the consciousness, find it, yeah, it's obvious. We can start understanding consciousness. Then there's science experiments. For example, one of the groups we're teamed up with is from Princeton University, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, in which the dean of engineering at Princeton, one of the top scientists in the world, the one who invented the engines they're using to send the Mars rockets now. For 20 years, he studied what's the relationship of human consciousness to machines. Can us just thinking influence machines? Oh, I'll be a spoiler. The answer was yes.
Okay. Raghunath, he's perking up over there. It's getting into the paranormal. He's
yeah, and he's passed on 2 years ago, but his a right hand, Brenda Dunn, was one of our keynote speakers, and we worked very closely with her. And he was a dean of engineering. He was no sluffer. And his idea was, he got concerned that could machines be impacted by human thoughts? It came in from the McDonnell Douglas aircraft. He was a Princeton graduate. And he said, what happens if our aeronautics gets so complex and the pilot's having a bad day. He got concerned about that. Could it impact it? So he gave millions to Princeton to study it. So, I mean, there's a lot of work done this way because, see, if we assume that consciousness is material, then the experiments we do are going to be very limited. Yes. If we just take a working assumption, not necessarily a belief it's true, a working assumption, consciousness might not be material, then what experiments, how would they be different? What would we look at? So this is what we do at the Institute. We're not trying to make an a priori assumption. We're just trying to do the scientific method and say, what if it was this way? What would it look like?
And if we open up to that breadth of experimentation or examination, it would seem that a book like the Bhagavatam would suddenly become so relevant in a way that whereas many people might categorize these texts as religious or even like yogic in a way that like something that's really not of particular relevance to the world, suddenly those books would seem to become important in another way.
This is an interesting question. What scientific information can we extract from ancient wisdom?
Yeah.
And you can get some far out, really weird speculations on this. At the same time, there's a lot of ancient wisdom that is just, you can't explain. You can't explain the cement in the pyramids. You can't explain that famous pillar in New Delhi made of iron that doesn't rust. So there was ancient sciences. I'm not saying these are mystical things that we're still...
Ancient aliens, perhaps?
Well, some say ancient aliens. I wasn't there to watch, so I don't know. But some assume that. It could be a lot of different things. But in the scripture, in the ancient texts from all over the world, there are many similarities. Now, the advantage of the Vedas is they're more extensive, more detailed. I'll give one little tiny example that many of you will say, this is impossible, but it really happened. And any of you who know high school math can do this yourself.
Raghunath?
No.
If you look in the Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, there is a description of the universe, and it's really weird to look at it. I mean, they talk about all these disks and plates and islands, but when you decipher it and put it in a computer model, you see it's describing the solar system from a geocentric point of view. Now, does the sun go around the earth around the sun? The simplest system, Achmann's razor, is, of course, all the planets going around the sun. But from a mathematical point of view, it makes no difference. You can make it Venus-centered, Mars-centered, Earth-centered.
It's just a question of the perspective at which you look at it.
It's all relative. It's all relative, correct. So if you take it from the geocentric point of view, we happen to be on Earth, it makes sense. And you project out the planets, and the planets are all in a flat plane, you find the dimensions of the orbits of the planets within 2% are the same as these islands described in the Bhagavatam. These islands are simply the orbits of the planets because they're flat, so they're described as an island. Well, it turns out that using high school math, you can calculate how far Mars is from Venus. And it comes out within 2%. That wasn't known until the 1850s.
That's amazing.
Who
discovered it?
Sariputta in the Mysteries of the Sacred Universe.
Amazing.
He was inspired by Harikesh said something to him, and he did all the math. And in the book Mysteries of the Sacred Universe, he does the math. And like I said, if you did senior math in high school, you can duplicate it yourself.
That's amazing. And I believe that they, when you look at it from another perspective, they begin to make all different kind of interesting patterns too, right? Is that right? I thought I heard that.
They do. There's all kinds of information. Yeah. I would say there's 10,000 years worth of study to be done. He wrote a whole book based on just 10 lines in the Bhagavatam. There were 10 or 12 lines. And from these 12 lines, he was able to do the math and show how far Mars is from Venus. And it worked. Now, then again, we have to be careful because it's very easy to speculate and go beyond what we know and come up with some phantasmagoria too. So at the Bhaktivedanta Institute, we try to combine rigorous science with appreciation of the ancient tradition. It's very easy for any and all of us to become fanatics ourselves. And the way we avoid becoming fanatics is we hang out with each other. And we hang out with people who are not us, but other scientists or philosophers. We did it yesterday. We had our socially distanced meeting of 20 of us sitting around, having a socially distanced pizza, discussing things. Because as I said at the very beginning, the most important work of anybody is who we hang out with. For example, why do scientists and doctors and optometrists all have their conventions? For the same reason, who they hang out with. So those of us who are interested in raising our consciousness, we hang out with people who want to raise their consciousness. Those who are interested in comparing science and consciousness, we hang out with those people. And those who are interested in hanging out with those people can hang out with those of us at the Bhaktivedanta Institute.
Well, thank you for hanging out with us today. We're running out of time, but I feel like you're just cracking things open. I think we have to bring you back at some point. Would you allow us that honor?
It's an honor, a privilege, and it's quite humbling to, I've seen your illustrious guests, so I certainly feel like the fly on the back of an elephant right now, but it's a real privilege to be here.
Thank you so much.
I think a paranormal. This thing could be huge.
Paranormal interview?
Paranormal perfect questions for perfect answers. And Brahmatirtha is the person who can answer those questions for me. I think it would be huge.
We can definitely go down the paranormal road.
They call it a rabbit hole, I think.
Well, I mean, you can go down a weird road,
okay,
and you can go down a road that you have to go down to talk about consciousness. So how to discriminate and be discerning on this, that's the key.
I think Brahmatirtha Prabhu could ground your paranormal obsession. I think he could bring it down to ground, still like open it up, but like kind of like.
Or maybe I can levitate him.
I think we've got a book here. At least another episode. Would you come back for a paranormal? Perfect questions for perfect UFO answers?
Of course.
Okay, we got to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for everybody for joining us on Zoom. We had a lot of Zoomers today. And thanks for all the others out there who listen abroad on YouTube. Hey, if you're listening on YouTube, you gotta write a little messages on the YouTube thing. It helps for us to get to the top of the filters there.
All right.
Also, if you are an other out there and we want to hear about your spiritual story, right on Apple Podcasts, give us a review and tell us how you got here. Thanks for everybody. This is the funnest part of the show where we strangely are in public places like me right now in my truck. Isn't usual, but sometimes I'm in my truck and we dance in our truck in front of a TV screen. Some of us are at work, some of us are at home, and we're just dancing and singing in front of the TV. And we find it to be one of the funnest parts of our day.
You do.